Local knowledge is, of course, imperative if we're going to engage local populations. Local people live in their context. They have an intimate understanding of its dynamics, constraints, and possibilities. They've been living there for a long time. They've been interacting with the environment for a long time. So if you're coming in to help and you don't take in consideration their ideas and their understandings, then you're most likely not going to have a successful project. Government science and the forces of capital tend to, of course, to use detextualized rationality, which essentially downplays the significance of local knowledge, and they really need to start realizing that local knowledge yields a contextualized rationality rooted in place and environment. And it's this contextualized rationality rooted in this place and environment that allows us to successfully address the problems in a long view, right? It's one thing to come in and plug a hole. It's another thing to come in and provide a solution that prevents that hole from ever forming again. A great example of this was talked about in reference to Honduras. By giving farmers the intellectual tools to solve their own problems themselves, they created long-term solutions. The argument here is that solutions farmers devise for themselves are far more likely to be relevant to their ecological, economic, cultural, and agricultural circumstances. This stresses the importance and validity of farmers' own knowledge about their local conditions, this nomothetic versus ideographic knowledge. The local farmers possess ideographic knowledge, and the scientists and government agencies generally possess nomothetic knowledge. Scientists help local farmers see these connections and point out phenomenons that aren't easily observed by the individuals in local communities. This creates a participatory development, which is different than development that we used in the late 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This requires getting a dialogue going between local people and scientists, between local knowledge and expert knowledge. So this combination of locals working with scientists, locals possessing that ideographic knowledge, scientists possessing the nomothetic knowledge, and then getting them together to come up with unique solutions. Local people don't always know the best, but conversations based on respect and concern of each party for the other may become solidarities of interests and sentiments. So if the university types and the government types can come in and show some respect to the locals, well, then the locals might show respect back to them, and they create these solidarities of interest that then can result in what we would call dialogic development. We have to accept that this is not an easy process, and it's hard to implement and manage. It's one of the reasons why governments have not engaged in this process as much in the past as we're seeing them move to in the future. The creation of best practices for ensuring successful participatory processes has started to surface, so we know how to do this easier. The goal here is to ensure that all voices are heard and all are welcome, that communication is open and available to all, and that the agenda is always open to change. An adaptive change perspective and process that engages the local communities to be on board with the changes that ultimately end up being proposed. This brings up the question of whether formal procedures are the best way to go about this. Some argue that formal procedures are necessary. Others argue that a more informal process might get the job done, and that formal procedures create what they call a thinning of solidarity. So if we over formalize, we see solidarity thin. This creates what we would call a grounded knowledge. So by recognizing one's own contribution and also recognizing their limitations, people can talk to each other and link together for change without universalizing their ideas onto someone else's experiences. So through respect and trust, we can create these solidarities of interest that allows us to ground the knowledge into our local situations and create solutions that are locally specific, as cheap as possible, and they get the buy-in from the community, and they ultimately result in long-time use of a solution to a community's problem. In the end, we have to find a balance. We have to understand that bureaucracies do defy democracy, and equality requires bureaucracy. So how do we navigate those two conflicting ideas? We also have to see that participatory practices are not above power. Rather, they are about power. A one-size-fits-all formal procedures of participation are no way to solve the problem. You can't govern trust, but you need trust to govern. The law protects you, but you protect the law. And finally, to have a dialogue of bottom and top, you have to have a bottom and top. And you also have to have a dialogue. It might sound simple, but you'd be surprised how often that point has brought things down. So find our balance, seek where these bottom-up grassroots organizations can work with those top-down governing and university structures, and start working towards a virtual environmentalism that everyone can engage in with little effort at all.